So as other colleagues say about Panama, today it's a hot day, but blue for the moment, so not raining yet.
Great. All right. Thank you. Have I missed anyone? My list of names was going all over the place, so I don't know if I've missed anyone. Have I missed anyone?
Nope.
No? Okay, great. All right. So even though you're all in such diverse locations, it seems like most of you have sunny, hot weather. So I guess that's a reflection of the topic that we work on, which is to do with commodities, many of which grow in, sunny, hot sort of weather. But even so, it's a very diverse community, and I think that's the strength of this community, and it's a source of very rich information that we can share and learn from each other. We have people who are based in 7 or more countries across 4 regions, from Asia to Africa to Latin America to Australasia. And you're also working for very different organisations. So we have UN, non-government organisations, private sector, and also Jamie from the government. Great to have you with us today as well. And the group's also working in very different fields and at different levels. So in this group, we have people who are specifically focused on communications work and communications activities, but also managers whose part of their role is communications work, overseeing communications. And of course, we work on varying different commodities and different projects. So a really diverse group with a rich source of content for all of us as we go forward on this journey of learning together. Despite the diversity, or perhaps, not despite, but even though this group is very diverse, the survey that many of you took before this session started, many of you had similar reasons for wanting to participate in this learning stream. And I've just clustered some of the reasons and some of the hopes and aspirations that you have for getting out, for being part of this stream. And many of you are keen to share best practices, make connections, maybe even join forces on communications activities, to learn from each other, learn new techniques, spread good ideas, and learn about working with different audiences. It was interesting, a lot of you spoke about audiences and working with different audiences and understanding different audiences. So that was very much sort of the hopes that we discussed. So today's session, as I mentioned in the introduction, is really the first of 3. And this session today is really about digging a little deeper into some of the key communication challenges that many of you expressed in the survey leading up to this session. And then the idea is that we take some of those challenges, and in later sessions, the next 2 sessions, we'll actually workshop them in case studies and come up, hopefully, with some new ideas and new learnings for how we can, maybe in our own work, overcome some of these challenges. So there were a lot of challenges faced by the group. So what I've done is I've actually put them into sort of different sections, and there were obviously a lot of reoccurring challenges, and I think they can be categorized into 3 different areas. So we're dealing with sort of communication challenges at the strategic level. So that's around how do you, many of you have many demands, you need to develop communication that raises the visibility of your program. You need to develop communication that supports fundraising. You need to develop communication that influences attitudes and behaviours. So how does one strategy or meet all of these needs? So there's a lot of challenges around the strategic level. Then there are also a lot of internal challenges expressed by the group, and these were around human resources, lack of financial and human resources, but also internal communication and coordination. And coordination came out as a big one because Many of you are working in programs and projects that incorporate many different stakeholders. So how do you coordinate with these different stakeholders, especially when you're trying to communicate as one group? That coordination issue was very much there. And then another basket of challenges was really in the external communications area. So we're often working with very complex issues. Commodities are complex, sustainable commodities are complex. And one of the key challenges that came out here are things like, how do you make that into a compelling message, a compelling narrative? So I'd like to go more deeply into each of these areas, looking firstly at the strategic challenges. So here, as I mentioned, the strategic issues are around, many of you spoke about audiences. How do we identify audiences? How do we segregate between them and get to know our audiences and develop messaging that reaches those audiences? Focus was a big concern given the different demands that many of you have, and also bringing the strategy to life. So after the strategy document is written, how do you make sure it doesn't just gather dust on the desk, that it's actually a document that's used, that the senior management has bought into, that everyone believes in and everyone actually supports? So I'd like us to take a few minutes now, or maybe actually less than a minute, to reflect on this area of strategic communication challenges. Thinking about your work now, do these challenges resonate with you? Or are there other challenges that you think are more pertinent in your work that we should be focusing on in the next 3 sessions? And then I'd also like you to think about if you could do one thing differently in the area of strategic communication, time and money not being not coming into play, but if you could do one thing differently, what would it be? So I'd like you just to take 1 or 1.5 minutes now to reflect on this question, and then we'll discuss and we'll see if people want to share some of their thoughts around this question. If you'd like to share a thought around this question, please raise your hand and I'll give the floor to you.
Go ahead, Simon.
Simon, yes.
Thanks. I only got a small hand. The thing that really resonates with me there is the audiences thing. And, I'm constantly aware that I am me and I am not them. Even the part of the audience that looks like me, I'm not really them. So getting into the audience's head is something that I'm really fascinated by. I used to be communications director for a big radio station, and we hired an agency there to do some audience research. And they actually used to follow the audience members around with a clipboard and sit in the back of the car and listen to what they were listening to on the radio. And I thought, that's fascinating. I'd love to be able to do that. But of course, you never really have the time. So how do you get into the audience's head is the thing that I focus on from those 3 points on the left.
Great, thank you. Actually, Matthias, I can't really see the raised hand, so maybe you could invite people to respond.
Go ahead, Gradia.
Yes, for me, the second point about focus is really my issue, because sometimes in our strategy, what we tend to target or focus on is a lot. And I tend to do that. I don't tend to prioritize because I want to get everybody. And sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming and you need to be strategic, focus on, prioritize your stakeholders, prioritize the audiences that are pertinent. And it's difficult because there's a multi-stakeholder platform, and you want to get, you want to send your messages as far out as possible, but there's a special time frame, and there's many, and you have to focus on exactly what you want to say to a specific audience, and sometimes not prioritize others. And this is a really, really big sticking point for me, because I tend to want to do everybody, and it's not possible to do everybody. So.
Interesting point about prioritizing audiences. Great, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you for those comments. One of the things that I think is great about having this network and having this community is the opportunity to share insights. And I'd like to ask Sandra Ramirez now to give us a bit of an insight on what you've done in the Costa Rica fisheries platform. So the team in Costa Rica, they went through a very comprehensive strategic development process, and they experienced some key challenges and opportunities in this process, and then made some strategic decisions as a result of that. I wonder if you could just tell us briefly, Sandra, your experience of putting together that strategy with a multi-stakeholder group, and what were the key challenges and opportunities and results?
Yes, of course. Well, our platform was launched about 2 years ago, and we worked by that time to design a strategy of communications that integrate every possible channel to achieve our main target, which is government officers, fisheries, fishermen, exporters, every stakeholders involved in the process of establish this dialogue process. We began to develop this strategy, basically proposing to use a mix of communication media for assure a wide dissemination of the project objectives and topics. As Lisa was saying, one of the challenges, the main challenges, was to convert some difficult issues in simple messages that achieve very different stakeholders and audiences. It is one of the challenges that we found during this process. The central axis of this mix of channels was development of a web page and the production of relevant communication contents, as I said before, with a simple content, but with a deep insight. Short videos or testimonial videos, as we call, infographics, live stories, press release, some examples of what we do during this last year, according to the different moments of the platform and the process of dialogue. During this last year, we have produced more than 10 videos, 4 live stories, and I think more than 100 publications in social media, including these kind of resources that I already mentioned. We prepare every month a social media content plans to share materials and promote the traffic to our website and to widely communicate our message. We think that, I think that one of the most valued products have been these testimonial videos because they reflect the diversity of stakeholders that are involved in our project. Fishermen, exporters, government authorities, coast guards, restaurant owners, academic people, all talking in 1 minute videos about the expectations and possibilities offered by the platforms for each sector. Well, also I have to highlight that to achieve this impact, our strategy was focused on create a coordination committee with the communication officers of the institutions, our partner institutions, MAC, Agricultural Ministry, Environmental Ministry, Fisheries Authority, in the way that we can join together to make the process of publication, of approval of any contents easier, because this is a very important challenge that we always confront in the everyday life. During the execution process, we also have to make a constant adjustment to the strategy, because the political context, the dialogue process, and the environment demands constantly adjustments and new definitions. And we work together with Sandra, Andraka, and with the rest of the team to make sure that we are adjusting our strategy to the context. I don't know, Sandra, if you want to add something else that I can forget about this process.
Thank you, Sandra. I could just maybe add that at the beginning of the process that Sandra wasn't working with us yet, we worked with a company, and they develop some ideas and strategy. And I have to say that, well, this is a challenge because sometimes you don't find the correct advisor from the beginning. So luckily, Sandra joined us later. But one of the things that we did at the beginning was that the main audience at the beginning was the steering committee. And that was because the idea of the platform of the dialogue wasn't adopted by the government yet. So at the beginning, we worked more to generate this ownership. And now I think that one of the challenges, and I think Sandra mentioned it, is that since this project is led by the government, the first word is I mean, the government in a way decide what is the communication route. Of course, we generate the content and we provide it with some ideas, but sometimes there is a different priorities or different messages from the government and from the industry and from the other stakeholders. So we have the challenge to find an agreement sometimes, not always, but sometimes between what the government wants to communicate and what other audiences, other members of the steering committee would like also to communicate.
Okay, great. Thank you. I could see Gadia nodding there furiously at the last comment. That was very insightful. Thank you. It's particularly interesting how you talked about the testimonial videos and getting stakeholders to really talk about why they support the platform. And the coordination committee is a great idea for getting different communications people, I guess they are, from the different agencies involved with the platform to work together. And then I really appreciated the challenge you highlighted there, Sandra, on trying to get everybody to agree to the message. That is, I can imagine, is very challenging. Unfortunately, we won't have time in today's session for others to ask questions of the people who are giving insights today. But after this session, we'll send out email contacts for everyone, and perhaps you can communicate and coordinate directly if you wanted to have any follow-up questions or communication between yourselves on any of the insights that are raised today. Okay, so that was really looking at the strategic side. When we looked at the internal sort of basket of challenges that came up, many of you spoke about limited human and financial resources, so the resources being very stretched across many demands. Confusion about decision making, so who signs off on different products, and also this idea of the internal communication, managing internal communication and coordination. So many of you are working in multi-stakeholder programs. How do you coordinate these different stakeholders and bring them together in one group? So again, if we could spend a short time reflecting whether these are the key sort of internal challenges that resonate with you. Are there perhaps others that we haven't captured here that you'd like to mention? And if you could do something differently in the way your internal communications is currently running, what would it be? So again, take some time to reflect, and then in a minute or so we'll discuss. So again, Matthias, I can't see the list of participants, so if you could call out anyone who raises their hand. So please raise your hand if you'd like to say something on this question, like to share something. Okay, no problem. Well, I'd like to now hand the floor to, oh, you're raising your hand? Oh, I mean, do you know?
But I'm raising it also in the...
oh, you're raising it like this?
I couldn't see, I'm sorry.
You could, but I raised my hand. Can you see the Matthias? Or is it not working? I mean, not here, but in the...
I'm having trouble with that today. Yes, please, Sandra, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I think that we feel completely familiar with all the are there on the screen. I would say that maybe, of course, we have limited resources, and I think that one of the work that Sandra has been doing is working very close with the other communication officers of the government, as she said. And so since we have limited resources, all the materials, all the media, all the press release, all the posts that we have on, in the social media, in Facebook or other media, Sandra shared with all the communicators, all the communication officers, so they are released at the same time in all the different channels that the ministry or the fishery authority or even the private sector have. So in this way, we take advantage of, the different channels of all the steering committee members.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else like to mention something? Okay, thank you for that. I'd now like to ask Marguerite to say a few words. Marguerite's the communications lead for Cocoa Life, which is Mondelesa's cocoa program, and they've had a lot of success with engaging corporate affairs colleagues in regions and countries who really then take the message forward. Which I think sounds like a great coordination, internal communication sort of achievement. Marguerite, could you tell us a bit more about that and how you've been doing that and the impact that that's had?
Sure. I guess maybe for you to understand, however, I'm the communications coordinator. I'm not in a classic corporate affairs role. So I feel sometimes I'm more of a content provider because I need to work with our global newsroom who manages all our channels. We do not have separate social media channels. And I work on regional levels who then cascade down to all the countries, you know, things like press releases, etc. So I would prepare a package and try to be as complete as I can to be able for others just to cascade that. I think the good news is the program is making great progress, and there is of course great content to tell. I guess that helps if people want to take, you know, ownership of the content, that you come with some good stuff. What I've tried to do as well is just make their life as easy as possible. So draft really engaging social media content, lots of infographics to go with it. We always would publish a blog on cocolife.org that turns into an e-letter, and then, you know, a press release kit to make sure there is visuals or videos with it, and materials that they can always translate, because that's always the key request. If people want to cascade, they need to be able to have things in formats to be able to translate as well, which is sometimes a bit challenging, right, of course, with graphics and stuff. And we also prepare even as much as potential stakeholder emails, or as well even pitch letters for journalists proposing who could be a spokesperson from the team in case they get traction. And giving enough heads up that things are coming helps then to create slots in their calendar that if I then distribute all the materials, let's say a week later, they've been anticipating it, and that rollout then can cascade across the organization. Now, again, they will then define if it's relevant for their market to talk about that specific part of the program, but I've really at least in those markets where they've had already initially communicated, new information about the program is more easily picked up. And very often it's sometimes specific journalists that are more interested in the sustainability story. And then our content helps to, again, pitch to those journalists and that media. But I think at the heart of it is just trying to almost, you know, make it as a ready package as it can be, and really not forget the visualization of the story or the infographic, if that's very often the quickest thing that speaks to people that they can use in one way or another.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so the next area of challenges is really around the external, and I think it segues very nicely with what you just said, Margaret, that often it's the visualization of the story that has the greatest impact. And this is where we also face many challenges, and many of you talked about this in the survey. How do you present, you know, these complex issues in engaging ways? How do you engage hard to reach audiences? And how do you get that, you know, those great photos and that great content from the field? Often many of you are based in cities, and it's expensive to travel or expensive to hire people to create content. So that was sort of flagged as another challenge as well. So again, if we could reflect and discuss, if you think about your work, are these sort of the key external communications challenges that you're facing? And if you could do one thing differently at the moment, reflecting on your work now, what would it be? Okay, if anyone would like to share their reflection, please. Yeah, Margaret.
The getting case studies from the field resonates with me a lot. We have, I think, about 30 to 40 implementing partners as part of the program, and I'm sure, you know, in more than 1,000 communities. And I think there is a lot more going on than I'm aware of. And it's just, the teams are so into the day-to-day that even just asking to get the first seeds of a case study story is just so hard. And then the drafting up and getting the right angle and the voice from the, you know, either the farmer or the community member, it's been really, really difficult. The one thing I'm trying now is to play it still more through our program partners. But again, you know, depending on the organization, they may not have that capacity or resource on comms either if they work so hard on just with the staff in the field. So that has been really a challenge.
Do you ever provide guidance or anything like that for your teams to gather that information?
Absolutely. And also, you know, just in what we think is a good story. And as I'm sure you all appreciate, people in the sustainability field, they can get so technical. And, you know, sometimes you just want that story from that person who can tell in their own words, this is what it was before and this is how it's now. And, you know, sometimes literally we ask people to travel from the communities to come to our office just to do direct interviews and recordings, but it's just very resource intensive. Yeah, even if you give guidelines on, you know, how could we approach it and think of these questions. We've prepped a lot, but it's still a lot of work.
I don't know how to raise my hand with the...
Yeah, I did it literally as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have Sandra, and then we'll go to Pascal after that.
Okay, thank you. No, I think that it worked. One of the challenges that we have is, well, the three of them, but also the presenting the issue of fisheries is very, very complex because it's not easy to talk about fishery because it's a productive activity where, well, animals are killed, you know. So it's not easy to communicate it to the general public. And I think that in Costa Rica is very challenging because there is a very strong environmental movement, and so usually what is in the media is, you know, that, I don't know, fishermen are killing sharks or whatever. So I think that in particular in Costa Rica we have a challenge with that, how to communicate from the productive point of view that is a commodity that, of course, you know, we're working in a balance between extraction and conservation. And I don't know if Sandra has any idea, but it hasn't been easy to communicate to the general audience or to communicate to, you know, with journalists or in other media. I think that for the moment, what we are doing is more focusing on the dialogue process, that we're in a process of dialogue, of building an action plan and try to find the solutions towards a sustainability fisheries. But it's very challenging here.
Thanks, Sandra. It's interesting because, I mean, in cocoa, obviously you do also have those issues, but you do have potential of wonderful visuals and that sort of thing, whereas in fisheries it's a bit more brutal looking, the visuals. So that's an interesting insight into the challenge. Pascal, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and now I know how to raise my hand. It's in the participants. I discovered. All right. But yeah, I wanted to say that the presenting complex issues resonates with me. In our case, we are trying to present and explain an integrated approach to sustainable supply chain or greening supply chain, commodities supply chains. And we are still having a little bit of chicken and egg issue because our theory of change, which should help then the communication to make it simple, is not yet finalized. So, I mean, to me, the presenting complex issues is clearly related to sequencing activities. And if I could do something differently, I mean, I would have made sure that the theory of change is super clear at the beginning of the project so that we can move into making it simple to communicate. Because right now we can't do that because we don't have a finalized theory of change. Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting. Libby?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in, and everything that's been shared so far from Pascal and Sandra and Marguerite, it resonates with me very much. One of the things that I think is interesting is the engaging hard to reach audiences, and I think I put this in my survey response. And I don't know, so for many of the programs that we're engaged in at ProForest, what we really want to do is reach out to either people that work in supply chain companies, sort of in offices in Brazil, or maybe some farmers for our palm oil program. We might want to reach palm oil farmers in Western Central Africa. And many of the kind of our traditional communications techniques are some of the fantastic things that Sandra mentioned before about creating infographics and blog posts and all of these other areas of content. They're great, but will they reach those audiences that actually we want to have an impact on? And I feel that I'm forever kind of trying to struggle with this, kind of that we might create great materials, but how do we make sure that that reaches someone in Kinshasa or elsewhere that really needs to hear the message? And so what I would do differently is I'd magically create a network to reach all of those people, but I don't think it exists. or does it? And I guess that's really what I want to hear, is other people that have struggled with that and come up with a good solution. Because I think so I'm solidly communications rather than a technical person, but as a communications person and then working with technical people, we produce some fantastic resources. How does it reach the people that we need it to reach?
$1 million question, I think, Libby.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Any other raised hands that anyone can see?
Great, yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to Libby from ProForest, and one of the things I've done a lot of in the past was work with local communities at landscape level. And one of the things that has been effective in the rural parts of Liberia was actually working through local community stations, especially if you want to reach forest communities or forest-dependent communities. And a lot of times we send out these infographics and all these nice posters we have, and they were not very effective because the people were not actually getting this, because it's not what they are used to when it comes to communication.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times we actually use theater. Apparently they understand a lot. They are really, really into theater for getting messages across. And you go and put these messages through a drama or play. And eventually you actually invite them to be a part of the play in some way. And that's a great way of getting feedback from them. So we use that a lot in the past for working with communities and getting messages across to them. It has been very effective, and I think it's something that we also plan to use in Liberia as we go about with our communications, implementing our communication strategies. So.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. That's such great ideas. I think I might follow up with you afterwards.
Great, thank you. Any other raised hands, Matthias?
Simon, I think, wanted to speak.
No, I was just volunteering to take part in the play.
Oh.
Maybe that can be one of our solutions in our case study that we do in the next sessions. Great, all right. So let's move on in the interests of time. So I wanted to, again, hand over the floor to Libby, because they have been doing some very interesting work around creating videos and photo stories to communicate the why behind their work. And it'd be great to hear more from you, Libby, about that approach and why you decided to go with the photo stories and the videos, and what has been the impact.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks, Lisa. So we've created a few different sort of multimedia assets, as you could say, to describe our work, and so I'm mainly thinking about the Africa Palm Oil Initiative program when I'm talking about this. And one of the first things we did was we created an animation, and the strategy behind that was because we are talking about a fairly complex multi-stakeholder program that's working with 10 countries and aiming to engage government, the private sector, civil society, and others. And so we wanted to create something that would tell that story as simply as possible to explain what are the motivations, kind of the fact that the vision for a sustainable palm oil sector across West and Central Africa. And by putting it into animation format, for a start, it was very cheap to do that because we did it in-house. We literally did it by creating we've got a very talented designer, created the graphics, and then animated it in PowerPoints. It's possible to do that. And yeah, so that's how those animations were created. So the budget expenditure was really low for that. I think if we'd have gone externally, it would have been a different story, but we were able to do it in-house. And then also for the animation, we were able to add to it as the program developed. So to say, okay, now Central African Republic has joined, and now this country has joined, and actually visually showing the flags. And one of the objectives behind it as well was to create a feeling of, I think somebody spoke earlier on about ownership, the importance of ownership. Now, we really need to ensure that governments are engaging in this initiative. And actually, by showing the flags of the different countries that are engaged, it's kind of hoping to create this feeling of enthusiasm and momentum that could kind of like carry the program forward. And in fact, that was really behind the kind of initial part of the strategy that led up to 2016, when 7 governments signed a declaration at COP in Marrakesh, basically the government's committing to a sustainable palm oil sector. So that was one strand of that, was the animation. And then the other strand is the photo stories and the films from the field. So one of the things that we've got with the Africa Palm Oil Initiative at the moment is it's very much focused on consensus building, and within each country, the action plans are developed by country teams that are multi-stakeholder, and they have action plans that need to be implemented. And we were very, very keen that we should start showing that implementation in action, again, to kind of with a very strong objective that we should be sharing that with the other countries to kind of encourage and share the learning and basically show what can be done. So in Ghana, we invested some money in working with a film company who happened to be really good and really cheap. And if anyone wants to know a really good film company in Ghana, I can recommend them, who went to the field and showed basically a session of training the trainers in action. And from that session, we were able to take photos, we created a video. So from one basic investment in the film company going to the field, we were able to create a range of different products, if you like, that we could use on social media, on the website. And yes, we used the third-party platform called Exposure, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with, to create photo stories. It's a free service. It allows you to use photos and really tell a story really well. And for our other photo stories that we've done in ProForest, you know what we've done? We've basically asked our team to take photos on their phones, and they've come back with great photos. And increasingly, I think that because we've got such great technology, just asking our technical, I mean, you guys might go to the field, but I never do, but asking the people that go to the field to take some photos, we can actually create some compelling narratives just on something that's been taken on an iPhone.
Great. And what's been the impact, Libby, of some of these things?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for one thing, it's definitely helped to raise awareness. So for going back to the initial animation in terms of telling the story, it's helped to raise awareness. And I've had some people say things like, "Oh yeah, I know that program. That's the one where you've got the funny people kind of doing this stuff because we've got these animated characters." And it's also helped to drive traffic to our website, drive traffic to briefing notes where you can find out more about the program. We can see more of those are being downloaded once we've shared the animations via social media. Also the impact, so we also use the films and the animations in events, so holding events. So as I was saying earlier on, I think one of the key, when we're trying to reach sort of like what could be termed hard to reach audiences, actually kind of building the networks via having lots of events, and we've held lots of events for the Africa Palm Oil Initiative, but we then show those films at the events as well, again to kind of create a feeling and hopefully kind of enthuse everybody that there's some amazing work being done under the program.
Great. Thank you very much for that sort of comprehensive picture of how these different products actually support each other and interlink. Wonderful. So, conscious of time, and it must be my German heritage, but I've managed to finish on exactly the hour. So thank you everyone for making the time today and sharing your insights and being open about the challenges and the things that maybe you'd like to do differently. I think it was a very rich session. And what we'll do now is we'll take what we discussed in this session, and in the next 2 sessions, which will happen probably a month apart, so there'll be